Hello, my name is Julie Smith, and I'm the Executive Director of the Identity Defined Security Alliance, and I want to thank you for joining us today. Our webinar today is presented by IDSA member Omada Identity, and it's entitled Privilege Abuse: What are the Risks and What Can You Do? In this session, you'll learn how IGA complements your privilege account management solution, how modern IGA can support you with security, compliance, and efficiency, and real-world examples of how Omada is helping large, complex organizations build an ironclad security strategy. Before we start the webinar, I want to point out a few logistics. We are recording today's discussion, so please make sure to share the link with your colleagues. Also, you'll be able to submit questions through the LinkedIn Live discussion window. So if you have any as the discussion unfolds, please make sure to submit them. So before I turn it over to our presenters today, I just wanted to give a quick commercial for the Identity Defined Security Alliance. The IDSA is a nonprofit organization that facilitates community collaboration to help organizations reduce risk by providing education, best practices, and resources to implement identity-defined security. Our membership is comprised of leading identity and security vendors, in addition to our customer advisory board members who provide guidance on our mission and represent the practitioner community. There's 36 organizations overall involved. All of our resources are freely available on our website, idsalliance.org, and I want to encourage you to go check out our recent research published yesterday, 2021 Trends in Securing Digital Identity. So now let's get started. I want to introduce you to our presenters today. Meet Martin Menzer. Martin is a senior architect in Omada Identity with more than 15 years of experience in identity and access. He has architected and deployed IGA solutions for some of the largest companies worldwide, translating customers' business requirements into sustainable technical solutions. Martin is an experienced cloud architect with a broad view on information security. Martin, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Julie.
I next want to introduce you to Rod Simmons. Rod is VP of Product Strategy at Omada in North America and has an impressive 20-plus year track record in the industry. Rod has a passion for innovation and software design, and he has extensive experience in leading and designing cutting-edge products and technologies. His key focus is on sharing his vision about the evolving IGA market and how Omada, a global market leader in identity governance and administration, can assist companies implementing successful IGA projects. Rod works closely with the product teams and CTO to define Omada's vision and objectives to achieve goals successfully. Rod, thanks so much for being here today, and I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you for having us, Julie, and we do really appreciate this. And I guess we should start off by thanking everybody who's joined us on the LinkedIn session to watch the webinar. I know that you guys have very busy days, and I know both Martin and myself, we appreciate having you guys here with us for the webinar. So let's just jump off and get started here. And I'll start with what our agenda is actually going to be, and then we'll move through the content today. So what we would like to define for you or lay out for you is, one, looking at the role of identity management inside of any organization, or more importantly, the role of identity, and then how that maps or complements any privileged access management strategy you might have. So how does a modern IGA and a PAM solution actually work well together? Then we'll start touching on common approaches for PAM. We'll touch on some access scenarios and pitfalls around that. And then we'll get into building the foundation of how you start from layer one and work your way all the way up. And then all along the way, if you have questions, if you put them in the chat, both Martin and myself will be monitoring the chat actively so that we can try to get questions answered in line, especially if you have to jump off the webinar and you have a key question you want answered. We want to make sure we can get to those as early in the time as possible. So a couple key things. Let's sort of start off by what we're seeing really in the news. And we've seen like a shift over, I'd probably say it's been coming over a decade, but we've seen a transition. So early on, when you were looking at either IGA or IAM solutions, it was really all about automation. It was really about trying to take manual processes you were doing at one time and fully automate those processes. And the transition we've seen is that identity has become more the forefront around any security practice. And it's in personally, when I look at it, I say it was almost an obvious transition, because the key challenge that you ran into with anybody was you were trying to define the who, the what, the where, the when. And if you take the who out of the equation, i.e. the identity, the person, the account, however you want to look at it, everything broke down, because you needed to know, I want to really be sure that that who in there is who I want to grant access to. And that's what the IDSA Alliance has seen in their most recent analysis survey. And that's equally what we're hearing from the Verizon data breach report. So regardless of where you look, you'll hear the same thing, which is identity is becoming more at the forefront of security practices. If you're looking at implementing like a zero trust security model, it's quickly becoming obvious that identity is kind of at the forefront of that. So that's the transition we've seen in the market over, I'd probably say, the last 10 years. But if you've been living and breathing IGA probably over the last 3 years, you'd probably say many of the requirements that have been driven from large enterprises worldwide have really heavily focused on identity and security. So we have multiple stakeholders who are at the table when you're having these conversations. It's not just a governance team, it's governance, it's security, and it's business operations. When you look at PAM, it's two of the things like peanut butter and jelly, I think. They really do complement each other, but traditionally they've always been very separate. So if you were looking at IGA, you were talking to one vendor set, but if you're looking at PAM, you were talking to a different vendor set. And we're seeing a transition in the market where those two technologies are starting to, if you will, slightly start to come together and complement each other, because I want to manage and govern my process, but I also have privileged identities on the other side that I need to manage and govern. So as it relates to, how does an IGA leverage a PAM solution, or how do they work and complement each other? There's a broad array of areas that we sort of focus on. One is around access certification. So typically your PAM solutions are making sure that the right people can go to the vault and either request a password or request a privileged session. But what they're not doing is recertification of that process on an ongoing basis. So immediately your IGA solution jumps in and tries to hit on those key things. The other thing is about temporary access. So you might say, I want this particular user to gain access, but I only want it to be on a temporary basis. So I have like two accounts, my Rod account and my Rod admin account. You can leverage your IGA solution to auto hydrate that person in a privileged group that they need to get into for that temporary purpose, and know that it'll be cleaned up as you go forward. So if your PAM solution doesn't support like just-in-time privileges or zero-standing privileges, you can leverage IGA with inside of that scenario to extremely complement what you have going on from that perspective. And then just monitoring what's going on with your users, because there's a bigger story that you get when you merge what's going on with PAM and IGA. And from a PAM perspective, they know that Rod requested this SQL account, this Oracle account, this or this account to like the mainframe. And while it was an admin account that they need to request to get in there and do things, we can actually coalesce a better story about what Rod is doing. So auditing really all the various activities Rod had, even when they're logging onto systems and they're not really any account that's truly their dedicated persona, but everything they're doing. So giving you a more holistic view around what's going on. And then also, like when you have admins who are transitioning out of your organization, that's probably one of those important things. At one point in time, I might have wanted you to be able to go to our vault, request credentials, request access. But if you're transitioning out and moving to a different organization or leaving the company, we might want to make sure that the governance solution is revoking the necessary access so that you can no longer get access to privileged accounts. So there's a wide variety of ways that we see that IGA and PAM really do complement each other as we move forward. So I'm going to transition over here, and I think it's going to jump into a little bit of what Martin wants to touch on for us about modern IGA.
All right, thank you, Rod. And so in the next slides, I will talk about modern IGA, today's use cases, and also what a modern IGA solution look like to basically cover the ever-increasing data volumes and integrations around digital identity. So what we see is that first of all, the different types of identities. There's a need to manage, beside traditionally employees, externals, especially also when organizations collaborate, and use that as a competitive advantage. So IGA solution have to manage business partners, they have to manage consumers, privileged accounts, but also devices bots, service accounts, all the different types of identities. And of course, that also defines new requirements, flexibility, scalability towards a modern IGA solution. As one part of this, also from an authoritative source perspective, so this can of course still be like your HCM or cloud hosted HCM, but then also you have sources like non-employee databases, consumer self-registrations, and also other sources where identities or accounts can originate from that will have access to your enterprise resources. For example, if you look at Azure Active Directory, then with the approach of having guest accounts or B2B accounts, so those accounts also need the appropriate governance rules and access governance that you always have in control of who has access to what resources in your enterprise. So overall, the necessity of managing additional objects is increasing. The necessity of having policies, like for example, automatically assigning access, but also the automation of approvals, the integration of GRC solutions, or in general external analytics or policy stores is increasing. And with that, of course, it's all about providing requesters in an access request, managers, system owners that have to make a decision in regards to access rights, to give them the necessary intelligence to make good educated decisions here. And then, of course, we also see a lot of additional requirements in regards to integrating other solutions in the identity ecosystem, like PAM, like ITSM systems, like different applications, cloud systems, and also cloud platforms. So it's a kind of an ongoing number of applications that organizations needs to integrate in a very short time frame, and that also requires that those systems use or provide standard APIs to integrate with. And also a modern IGA solution also has a very flexible approach towards configuring and integrating connectivity towards those systems and applications to get an integration up and running in a very short time frame. So, Rod, so let me quickly iterate on the typical use cases that we see at customers and in the market. So basically, I mean, those days, most of the organizations, they are asking for cloud deployed identity governance solution, because obviously they want to get rid of all the administration tasks, all the infrastructure maintenance, patching, updates, and so on. So a cloud deployed IGA solution is one of the key demands here. Also access governance for Office 365, such as Teams or SharePoint Online, cloud file shares, but also the whole infrastructure entitlements, either on premises or in the cloud, is definitely a topic that is of today's use cases. As I said before, a lot of organizations adopting Office 365, they will have those Azure AD B2B guest accounts. And then it's always like a balance between enabling business flexibility for users and also securing those access rights and applying new governance rules to make sure that access to business critical resources is under control. So we will also get to another example of that later. Contextual access management. So this is very much about understanding who has a certain access, in what location, in what organization, what position an access get assigned. And whenever such things or master information are changing, then also the IGA solution can react and remove the access automatically. Risk is also an important topic that already at the time of requesting an access, approving an access, the decision makers always require the transparency of the risk level. So this can either be directly from within the IGA solution or also integrated from an external GRC system to really provide this process intelligence to enable for educated decision here. In addition to that, of course, a business user-friendly user interface with a seamless user experience is also key. So users need to understand in regards to access, what are they looking for, what they potentially have to request to fulfill their jobs, ideally automatically assigned, but all these specific access rights, it's also important to provide guidance here to users without any additional training requirements. And then very often, as IGA is also a mature topic, then organizations are asking for best practice processes and best practice frameworks. So it's really important that in an ideal situation, that 80% of the organization's requirements can be already covered with out-of-the-box functionality, best practices. And then let's say the rest 20%, which makes an organization unique, then you need a flexible platform to cover that requirements with a fast time to value. And of course, the integration of business applications and systems infrastructure with a closed loop reconciliation, where you always have the ability to get in control and stay in control, is one of the key use cases that we see here. So if you look at the elements of a modern IGA solution, so it's definitely modular, ideally cloud native architected, and using a service-based architecture. So the requirements are really to, with this ever increasing number of objects, policies, and so on, that the system can dynamically scale also in when there are performance requirements in peaks, like beginning of the month or end of the month, that the solution can automatically scale up and down. I already talked about integrations, so it's important that IGA solutions provide APIs, REST APIs, SCIM APIs, that data can be pushed to those solutions, but also be read from those solutions. And of course, also integrating other systems and applications in the ecosystem in a short time frame. As I said before, those 20% or ideally covering 80% of the common use cases with best practices. For the rest, for the unique requirements of organizations, it is essential to have a flexible, configurable data model and extensible solution, getting rid of all the requirements to do coding and ramp up implementation projects. So that should just be available as configuration capabilities to enable fast time to provide value to the stakeholders here. Deep system application integration, I talked about that. Deployments, of course, if it's a cloud hosted solution, then all the patching and all the solution updates will happen automatically, but also like the comprehending part with customer specifics, those should be easy to deploy and easy to implement with low complexity. And then, of course, if that foundation is set up, then organizations, they can also benefit from using additional analytics, additional autonomous decision support supported by AI or machine learning algorithm to even get more value out of a modern IGA solution. So now that we looked at the IGA use cases and elements of a modern IGA, so Rod, what are the common PAM approaches?
Yeah, so PAM is, I mean, I would say anybody who's been probably around the PAM market, and I know I've been around it for a while. When you sort of jump into PAM, the most typical place, the entry, I say the gateway for most people into PAM is around account vaulting, which most organizations are dealing with. They have hundreds, if not thousands, of accounts that they want to take and put into a vault. So it's typically the shared accounts. So you have an account that might be administrator in your Active Directory domain or on a server, or it could be your sys account on a database. You take those, you throw them into a vault, you scramble the password, and the vault now owns and manages that account. If you need it, you can come to the vault, request it. And in early days of the vault, it was you would request it and it would give you clear text credentials. You can go log on to the device. But now I think that transition with it is, we don't want to give you the password. Why don't we give you a session? So that way the user can get logged in automatically without any knowledge of the password. So if I need to get into some type of network device, it can auto log me into that device. And that's more where you transition to session management. And then from there, with session management, you can record what the user's doing during their active session. And then when they're done, the credential is checked, the session is checked back in, the credentials checked back in, and the vault auto scrambles those. So account vaulting and session management kind of go hand in hand. If you kind of take a separate spin on it, it's privileged task automation. So typically, if you think about something like sudo, is really designed to say, I know that you need to create users within my environment, and you need to add users to groups. So I'm going to give you those tasks, but I'm not going to give you the ability to shut down my server, for example. So you do policy-based management. So rather than giving you an account that can actually do these tasks, I'm going to give you the exact privileges you need to perform the task that you want to do. And that's where privileged task automation comes in. The other key thing that you always want, and the reason why PAM is so valuable, is because they centralize the concept of control and audit. So rather than you having to jump to 15 different tools from one location, you can see all the audit trail, audit log of what's going on. The next generation of PAM, I think, which is where it's transitioning to, is this whole concept around just-in-time access. And it's all about reducing the attack surface. So when you think about zero standing privileges, or you start thinking about zero trust, any of those models are really about trying to make sure the user has the least amount of privileges. So with just-in-time access, you don't have the access, but I'll grant it on demand. Some might argue, well, session management is doing that. You don't have access, and I'll grant it on demand. But others might look at it and say, well, wait a second, I want my non-privileged account that I have on a day-to-day basis. When I need access, you'll just elevate that account. I'll do what I need to do, and then it goes away. So for some organizations, it takes away the need potentially to have the ROD and the ROD admin account. Or you could just say that ROD admin account will be the one that's auto provisioned and deprovisioned. And that sort of complements both what you're trying to do with just-in-time access as well as zero standing privileges. Another approach with zero standing privileges is some people just say disarming the account, which is revoking the privileges. The other approaches, which some vendors have taken down into account, is why don't we just disable the accounts? It's really all about removing the attack surfaces. But regardless of where you are in the PAM journey, these are some of the key scenarios that we see coming in. So really quick, I think we have a question sitting. Oh, you got it?
Yeah, we have a question from the audience here, Rod. So how do you see customers in practice using IGA and PAM together? Is that an industry transition?
Yeah. All right. So I'd probably say the first place that we've seen when customers come to us is that they want around access certification. So, and I think I touched on that earlier. And the whole point about access certification is that my PAM solution doesn't today validate that Rod should be able to request the access to these accounts in the vault. So we want to make sure that there's somebody who's reconciling and doing that certification. The next place, and obviously a really logical place, is for the IGA solution to leverage the vault. So if you imagine that you have Thycotic, CyberArk, Beyond Trust as a vault that you're leveraging, you might want the PAM solution to reach out and call the vault and say, when I need to do, like when I'm doing my synchronization, which is either pulling stuff from your platforms or adding stuff into your applications, I'd like it to contact the application, get the credential account it needs, and then relinquish that back, so that that you're using the PAM solution for what it should be, but the IGA solution doesn't have this concept of a long-standing account that lives with inside of it. And then the other places for added gates, we've seen a lot of customers who say, you can check out your privileged account through our vault, But when you need to request that access, you're going to go through the IGA solution to say, I need my account to be added to, let's say, domain administrators, for example. And once that gets approved, now you can go to the Vault and do the request to checkout. So the Vault will auto let you check out your account on your own, but by default, we'll always make sure your account doesn't have the necessary privileges. So those are the kind of places we've seen. And I think the other part of the question is it a transition we're seeing in the industry? And I'd say, yeah. I think many customers are still wanting to go with best of breed. So I think there's like probably 3 big PAM vendors that many customers like to resonate around. So yes, and if you listen to like Gartner or Forrester, all of them are saying that IGA, access management, and PAM and all that stuff is starting to converge. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to Martin to talk more about probably an advanced use case that he's seen in the field for customers leveraging PAM and IGA together.
All right. Yeah, basically, as you mentioned before, if we look at number 1 here, so the typical integration scenario between IGA and PAM is that the IGA solution can basically create the users directly via a SCIM or REST API, or indirectly via LDAP in a PAM solution, and also assign the necessary access to the different vaults in a PAM solution. And of course, with having that knowledge, then this also enables for access certification, as Rod mentioned, but also it of course enables the IGA solution to retrieve credentials from such a vault to actually connect to the integrated system. So that's kind of the very common use case. What we also increasingly see is then to build kind of the bridge or the combination of whatever you have in your IGA solution, in your PAM solution, but also the information from the configuration management database. So that's item number 2 here, where typically organizations have stored all their applications, infrastructure components, and also the necessary ownership related to it. And that information IGA can basically retrieve and link up to the privilege data from PAM. And then in a third step, IGA can of course also discover the infrastructure. If it's an on-premises infrastructure or a cloud provider, cloud infrastructure, then those information, those components can be retrieved. IGA can also detect what are the privileged accounts and related privileged access rights in the infrastructure, and then basically can combine those information and present the necessary compliance information to the owner. And then the owner will basically, again, get an educated overview. So what is your infrastructure component? What is the privileged account on that infrastructure component? And what's the compliance status? In that case here, in this example, privileged account is approved. So that means it is a privileged record in PAM. It's a privileged account in the infrastructure, and also the component is known to the CMDB. But of course, it can also happen that there might be accounts with privileged access that are not known to your PAM solution. And then IGA, with these integrations of the different components, can actually detect that and can then present this information to the owner to make a decision. What should happen to such account? Should it be added to a PAM vault? Should it be disabled? Should it be removed? So those scenarios can also be covered by those integrations here.
Cool. All right. Awesome. So, and I would say one of the other nice things about what Martin was talking about is SOD. Like the one thing that IGA can bring to your PAM solution is that segregation of duties, where I can get access to production but not test. That's another beautiful thing that you get with IGA. But what I want to do is kind of take you guys back a little bit and touch on. And if you go back to 2010, I was digging through and trying to say, like, where were we at like 10 years ago, like from looking at this, the market standpoint. And I found in the Verizon data breach report, one of the key things that I was like, yep, this is exactly where we were 10 years ago, which is it was all talked about quickly deprovisioning user when they didn't need access to resources. And it was really about, if you don't want a user to have access to your data, get them the heck out of your system. So that's where we were. And that's what we were talking about 10 years ago. You fast forward now, actually roughly 11 years later, I don't want to say we're still in the same situation. I think we've really sort of recognized where it's at, and it's more about that reviewing the access. So it's not just about trying to get the users out of your system, but making sure that you're having timely access reviews. And it was more focused. It was saying around privilege access, around sensitive data. So that's what the IDSA Alliance found actually in their most recent survey is, when do we want to make these transitions? When do we want to look at this data? But we also saw a complementary saying in the most recent Verizon data breach report. And I think it takes it on a twist, which is privilege abuse is so hard to detect. And really what they were saying is, if you look at privilege abuse and you compare it to many of the other attack vectors, it just still remains a very hard one to detect. And I think us all to rest assured, I was waiting for the Verizon data breach report to say, did we see an increase in attack vectors based upon now having a highly remote user workforce? And the one thing that was really resounding in the data breach investigation report was, nope, it didn't change. Regardless of whether users are in your organization or remote, we really didn't see any transition in them being a higher risk to your organization. All right. Sorry, we've got one more question here. Let me get to this one. Okay. Why do you think privilege abuse is difficult to detect compared to other breaches? So I think that probably starts with it's not always about privileged users. It's rather about privilege. It's rather just about a user who's granted some type of access in your environment. And if you put that in context, if the permissions you're giving me are sufficient for me to perform my job, it's very hard to distinguish between the access you granted for me to do my work and whether or not I'm maliciously using those. And I think it comes in common. I'm not going to say that anybody watching this webinar was getting ready to resign, start a new job, and realize that we got a lot of processes here that really work well that would give me a jump start at my new company, and they just copy those documents. It seems like a very innocent thing, but again, that's privilege abuse 101 right there. So I think it's just very hard to detect. Did Rod download that document to abuse his privileges, or did he download that document with the intent of trying to do something for our organization? So I think that's probably where we sort of see it at. So let's talk through probably a general use case that we've recently seen at a manufacturing organization to kind of give you a little bit of context and some ideas of what's going on around access requests and the challenges.
Exactly. So basically, this also goes back what I mentioned initially. So we are seeing a lot of different sources of identities and types of identities, and especially with cloud technology, where people can collaborate fast together. Now I lost the slides, Rod.
Sorry, I got kicked out of there for a second. Let me get the share going again. I apologize, Martin. All right, go share screen. Do deeply apologize for that. Always technical difficulties. Can you see that now, Martin? Martin, are you there? All right, so I think I'll probably. Oh, Martin, are you there now?
Yes, and I can also hear.
All right, I got booted out. I do apologize. I think your slide is up and you should be able to see it.
All right, so let me start again on that one. So basically, this example is also going back to what I mentioned earlier about new types of identity, new sources of identity, and especially using cloud services where people can quickly collaborate. It's especially important to understand who has access to your resources based on what systems and or identity providers. So in this specific example, it was a quality engineer in a manufacturing organization, and he basically shared some critical documents with someone in a partner organization. And for that purpose, he was just inviting via his OneDrive, could also be Teams, of course, a collaboration partner to basically get access to those documents. And that was fine. So they could collaborate in no time, work together on the documents, and very convincing. But then Maria, so that was the business partner, she then left the organization and is now working for a competing organization. But I mean, the actual access that was assigned for some reason was used to a private Hotmail address, which is of course critical. And now this identity or Maria now still have access to those business critical documents. And John, the quality engineer, had basically no transparent capability to understand that this access is still present, right? Because he simply forgot to remove that access. And this basically highlights that it's important to understand where your identities originate from, integrate them to your IGA solution, have a proper life cycle, especially for partners, non-employees, and make sure that access is reviewed, but also removed in time, which is a little bit back to the kind of basics, but especially with new sources of identities and governance rules that are not necessarily adopted yet in organizations, it's important to keep those things in mind here. And of course, manual processes simply doesn't fit to the speed of collaboration that is possible with cloud services. Yeah.
And Martin, we have a question for you. What are the different options to govern Azure guest accounts based upon your experience?
Good question. So basically, we typically recommend two approaches. So one approach is if you want to kind of maintain a high level of business flexibility, then essentially we can, in this specific scenario, we can detect those guest accounts in an Azure Active Directory, for example. We can create those as identities and then also establish a proper life cycle. So for example, the person inviting such a guest will then get a notification, you're invited in your guest account, and please recertify this identity every 3 months, for example. Or if you do not do it within that time frame, then it will be automatically disabled, as an example. So this is more a detective approach where you basically keep a high business flexibility. The other approach that is more managed, you could also say maybe a little bit more secure, is that the IGA solution itself will basically take over this invitation part. So where the invitation has to be triggered out of the IGA solution initially, then those accounts can be created. And from that point in time, then access can be assigned to Teams, to SharePoint Online, but also to other cloud services, which are, for example, utilizing Azure Active Directory groups for authorizations. So that's very much the two approaches that we see and recommend.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the places I see that complements what Martin is saying is about that temporary access. I think when people look at an IGA solution, most people just want to grant access and they set it and forget it type of concept. And one of the really key things that you can do is like temporary access. Now, expiring access is it's a great place to use with like guest accounts to your organization, because someone should certify that they need access beyond, let's say, the month, 3 months, or 6 month time frame you want to grant the access, so that you know that at some point in time in the future, even if it's not as timely as you desire, that it does go away. Temporary access is a fantastic option for going around that. But you need to put some general rules around, like when you're going to do temporary access, because you kind of go overboard. And it's not just about contractors. It's also about employees internal to your organization. What we know for a fact is that most people don't access half the content you give them access to. So in that case, could you go with like a temporary access model and say, based upon the sensitivity of the content, based upon the privilege level of like the account that you're granting access to, or based upon like if it's an executive, we just grant them access and forget about it because we don't feel like dealing with them complaining. But if it's a normal user, we'll deal with some type of segmented access. And it's also thinking about the user experience. What we don't want to do is do temporary access, and then the user every Monday has to request the access again and wait for the system to govern the access, so they're losing productivity. Temporary access is more about ensuring that it doesn't go too long. So you might say, we're very comfortable with certain access being granted on a quarterly basis. So if you need the access, you can re-request it, or your manager on your behalf can extend that access for you. So it's just trying to think about, how do we sort of manage this? And some of the processes may be, it requires approval. Others, if it's non-sensitive data, it's just generic data, we just grant the access and there's no approval required. So it's allowing users to say, I need this access, they go get it, and it's auto approved throughout the system. So just some things to think about as you're looking at methods for temporary access. We're going to try to get through some of these slides quickly because I think we're running towards the end of time. But no matter how you approach any problem and you listen to anybody, if you get back to the basics and you start thinking about the basics, always do solve the vast majority of challenges most organizations have. And when you're thinking about governance and IGA, let's talk a little bit about how you can leverage some of the basics to address challenges.
So typically, the basics, they always fall back to the categories that are well known, which is about compliance, security, and efficiency. From a security perspective, and this is not a information technology matter. It's really a board level concern to make sure that you are compliant to regulations that you're operating within, you are utilizing frameworks, you are identifying the risks that you have, and then you're mitigating it. So it's really important, or it's the license to operate for organizations to be compliant. And at the end of the day, also a competitive advantage if you can give the necessary trust to your customers, business partners, that you are dealing in a secure way with their data and information. And of course, from a efficiency and enablement perspective, as we've seen before, with this evolving number of systems, objects, data to manage, mergers and acquisitions. So it's really important to have a flexible IGA solution that can be integrated to the identity ecosystem, which will essentially then provide significant time savings while using best practice processes. And so it's really all about those basic categories here again. And what we actually recommend, if you can go to next, Rod.
Oh, sorry, I apologize, Mark.
No problem. So the recommendation here to achieving those basics is really to get transparency and control. And actually, when I say transparency and control, here, it's really all about understanding what identities you have, where do they originate from, what access rights you have, is it in your on-premise applications and systems, is it in your SaaS services, or is it in your cloud infrastructure? So all those things you need to get transparency on. You need to understand also what is your level of data quality, and then also probably implement your security controls to enforce that. So this is what we say, this is the foundation also then to enable for more advanced use cases. If you understand what you have, what your data looks like, and also how you can improve it over time and measure that, that's really the foundation for also more advanced use cases. So the architecture, the IGA architecture should of course be modular, flexible, be able to scale using standard protocols, making those standard protocols via APIs available. Using a cloud delivered solution will also, of course, also based on research, drastically reduce the total cost of ownership, while also improving agility and removing the cost of administration here. And as I said, if you have this transparency and control, then you can also look into process automation, look into additional intelligence, analytics, machine learning capabilities to further simplify and provide the guidance and automation that can more seamlessly assign and also revoke access. And this is, of course, then also based on integrations to the different technology in the identity ecosystem.
So I think we agree on one thing: is the more you can do integration across your vendors, absolutely the better. So we want to thank the IDSA Alliance for allowing Omada to do a presentation here today, and thank all of you guys who took time out. If you want to get links, we do have Omada has a identity survey that we recently did that you can gain access to. I try to put some bit.ly links up there so that you can get access to them and not have to write down extremely long URLs. And many of the numbers and stats that we actually quoted were from the 2021 trends in identity and security. So that's on the IDSA site. If you already know the IDSA, you probably can just navigate to the site and get it, but I wanted to make sure there's a quick URL link for people to get to that. So with that being said, we appreciate all of your time today, and hope that you guys have a safe and great rest of your day. Thank you, Julie, very much for getting us introduced here and getting us going. Thank you very much. Have a great day, guys.
Thank you.